Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. As we come down to the final 2 weeks of the legislative session, this year's session in Tallahassee feels different from previous years. We have not seen the culture war battles that define the Florida legislature in recent years. Bills to ban all abortions and protect Confederate monuments and make it illegal to use a person's preferred pronouns all went nowhere. Now, there could be a couple reasons for this. It's possible that after pushing through so many crazy bills previously, there was nothing left for them to do. But it feels more like this legislature isn't as willing as it used to be to give Governor Ron DeSantis a blank check. And that's a good thing. Since DeSantis was crushed in his presidential bid, legislators don't seem as scared of DeSantis as they used to be. Let me give you an example. The governor had wanted to push casino gambling on behalf of one of his biggest campaign donors, Jeffrey Sofer. Sofer really wants to turn the Fontainebleau Hotel on Miami Beach into a casino, even though no one on Miami Beach wants it. But the legislature said no to DeSantis. They said no to Sofer. And at least for now, it's dead. We'll see how long this newfound independence lasts, but the key is having legislative leaders who just don't cave to the governor's demands. Which brings us to today's guests. This week, I spoke to Republican State Senator Ben Albritton and Democratic State Senator Jason Pizzo. Albritton will be the next Senate president next year, and Pizzo will be the minority leader in the Senate. I started by asking if I'm right in sensing that the legislature is asserting its own independence more this year than it has in the past.
Oh, I wouldn't say that you're wrong. Look, at the end of the day, you also can't see what happens like inside the belly of the beast, right? So the conversations that are happening, the negotiations that are happening, and you know, how we come up with the end result is something that that you wouldn't be aware of. So what I would suggest to you is that there was a huge amount. The legislature did a good job that last season, and it's happening this season as well, especially the Senate President, Kathleen Passidomo, of standing up for the value structure of where we believe good policy will land. So it may seem that way to you, but the legislature's been alive and well through this whole thing, for sure.
Senator Pizzo, I'll let you weigh in. You might have a different perspective watching it from the Democratic side of things.
I am objectively feeling and participating, I think, more this session than any other with leadership on the majority side. Just yesterday, it's something that I won't hold a press conference about. The public probably will never know, but Senator Albritton was working behind the scenes basically all day, probably with a bunch of other people's priorities as well, but trying to get one bill that's important to my community, important to my district, just finding a place to put it and finding a way to fund it and getting it done. And I think Senator Albritton's point is that a number of issues and a number of policies and philosophies were aligned, I think, with the governor in the past few years. I don't want to say that he's out of ideas, but Senator Albritton has made it clear that the legislature is a distinct branch of government.
Yeah, well put.
When we look back on what this session was about, what do you think the answer is going to be?
Well, from my perspective, every year there's actually only one thing we are required to do, and that is to pass a balanced budget. So most of the work that I'm doing now, most of the work that I've done in the past has been in the budget area. So my goal is, among others we could talk about, but my goal is to make sure that we build a fair and balanced budget that focuses on real challenges, provides funding where it's actually needed, and the efficiencies of the mechanism of budgeting in the legislature yields the best result for Floridians. I mean, that sounds a little bit like a campaign slogan or something, but it's true. We want to build a budget that works for as many Floridians as possible. So that's the biggie for me.
Senator Pizzo?
This session has been objectively fewer culture war, divisive issues, just has been. Very few remnants of any of the issues that caused sort of angst across the aisles with one another. And Senator Albritton is the incoming Senate president for the 24 to 26 term. God willing, I'm the minority leader at the same time. And I think we're sort of establishing relationships, feeling each other out, and trying to get more sort of ecumenical, less divisive, nonpartisan issues to be the focus over the next couple of years.
All right, so let me see if I can get some divisiveness going here. Let me see if I can stir the pot a little bit. This kumbaya is a little much at times. I am curious from a budgetary standpoint, though. Can you explain why it makes sense for the state of Florida to continue to turn down Medicaid expansion funding? Why we wouldn't want those federal dollars to be able to insure 6, 7, 800,000 Floridians so that they don't have to show up into emergency rooms where they end up costing taxpayers a lot more. What is your argument against expanding Medicaid? Since we're one of only 10 states in the country that don't accept the expanded Medicaid.
So let me just start with a premise of this. I am open-minded to the discussion. I'm not going to speak for any of my predecessors or anybody else that's been put in a position to be able to effectuate some kind of change or perpetuate some kind of idea. So I'm going to be very clear as well to say that I don't know a lot about Medicaid as a whole. It's a very complicated system. But if you want to talk about it 30,000 feet, is it something that I'm open to having a conversation about? That answer is yes. I'm also going to be clear, Jim, and not say once all the final perspective is understood, this is a magnitude 1 change. It's a big moving object, right? This idea of Medicaid expansion. Once I get to the end, we'll be thinking about this, working on it, understanding it. And then if we get to a place, the answer would be yes, or the answer would be no. It'd be based on the factors I've arrived at that point. So
let me just stay with you for a second, Senator. And it seems almost that it's more ideologically based among those who come out against it, almost in a reflexive, I'm a conservative Republican, so therefore I must oppose Medicaid expansion, whether it makes sense or not.
What I will say to you is that what you will see and your listeners will see, and I believe Jason would hopefully would support this. I'm a big believer in doing what's right for the right reasons, right? And understanding what that is to make decisions by matters. It could be politicized. It could not be. It could be philosophical. It could not be. I'm a data guy, and what I want to do is understand what it means. Now, holistically, right? We can have a philosophical conversation about Medicaid expansion, but I'm a data guy. I want to be well informed when I make decisions. I push away the best that I can to make decisions based on politics. I want it to be based on real factors, real people, and real data. The data will always be something foundational and firm to stand on. So that's my perspective. I won't speak for anybody else.
Senator Pizzo, let's talk about Medicaid expansion for a second. You've advocated for it. Why do you think it makes sense?
Well, so when I came into the legislature now 6 years ago, the macro conversation was it's basically a 90-10 split. And the argument against it that the other side of the aisle sort of entrenched themselves with is, yeah, it's 90-10. We get it. We're leaving $5 billion a year on the table. But at any point, the federal government can either change that agreement, change that percentage split, or just bail out, in which case Florida would be on the hook. Jim, in all candor, I would say I had a Republican colleague of mine the first year that I was here, Senator Jeff Brandes. He's like, listen, the Democrats in Washington can call Florida's bluff by sending down a block grant tomorrow that is specifically earmarked for Medicaid expansion, and they can send it down and call our bluff. And they haven't done so. So I, like Senator Albritton as well, like data and numbers, like math, because it has one right answer. I don't totally buy into the 90-10 split can go to 80-20, 70-30, 60-40, leaving us holding the bag. I do believe, as it relates to healthcare, we should take what we can get. But at the same time, this is one of a few issues that I think DC could have sent down and called our bluff with a block grant.
Several states have opted to put Medicaid expansion on their ballot. I believe Kansas did, and it passed. I think a number of red states have put it on the ballot and let voters decide whether or not they want to engage in that, whether or not they want to receive these dollars back. Philosophically, Senator Albritton, I'm curious, your view of what should go on a ballot versus what you as a legislature should take on yourself, because there's always sort of a bit of a of a tension there. What do we take on because we're the policy expert people versus what should we put on the ballot? Is Medicaid expansion, again, I realize you probably haven't thought about this in this term, but is that something that could potentially be on the ballot in the same way that we're now seeing abortion potentially on the ballot, marijuana on the ballot? What do you think of ballot initiatives?
What a great question. Now, to be honest, it's almost how long's a piece of string question, because it depends on the issue, it depends on the politics of it, the policy of it, the season of it. There's a lot of different things. I mean, look, we have in our state constitution a ban on pregnant pigs in pens in our state constitution. Now, I'm sure that the folks that brought that to the ballot had the best of intentions, right? But to be honest with you, that's a little bit embarrassing. So when you're talking about altering the Constitution of the state of Florida, it should be for something substantial. That's the key, right? How do you define substantial? That's people, places, and things.
Although the Florida statutes do read that the Florida legislature recognizes that healthcare is a human right. So we find that balance. And
yep. So
well, let me ask you this. Currently, it is 60% approval. I think after the pigs at issue, I think it went from 50 to 60. It's now at 60%. But I've also heard some discussion of making it 66%, taking it to 2/3. Also, the legislature in recent years have made it harder to get measures on the ballot for some of the reasons that you cited with regard to the pregnant pig. But I also think that there are some who view that as the legislature not really wanting the public to be able to control their own destiny in those sorts of ways. Where do you stand on the question of whether or not a ballot initiative should remain at 60% or constitutional amendment, or should it go to 66 or 2/3, essentially?
I need to address one thing, though. I think, Jim, the idea of Floridians having their perspective heard and implemented, that happens in elections right now. This is a constitutional democratic republic, and the fact is that every district has representation. Constitution gives us a directive of that, and that happens. There are elections every 2 years. So the voice, I feel like, if the election, so as an example, in my district, I come from a very rural, very conservative district. The vast majority of the people that live there look at the world the same way I do. The process yielded a good result, at least from their perspective. Doesn't mean I'm special. It just means that I view the world the way the majority of folks in my district do. And I come up here and been given the authority to make decisions, push a red or green button based on my philosophical beliefs. So, we can, it's probably worth a larger discussion, Jim, on the idea. So you don't get what you want with the legislature, go try to put something on the ballot. It could work also inversely.
They have 28, we have 12. So if we don't have the votes inside the chamber, we pivot, I think, obviously, and inject resources on the street on petition drives to try to get and use the electorate, use our constituents as a fourth branch of government or a second branch of the legislative silo.
But our government's set up that way, right? We have three branches of government. We have the executive, judicial, and legislative, right? So it's set up to have a balance of power. So I'm not being critical of anybody that believes wholeheartedly enough to put something on the ballot, right, for a constitutional amendment. What I'm saying is yes, they should be measured. It should be something that is really, really important, because the Constitution should be sacred and highly valued. But that being said, the balance of power and the way government works provides these opportunities for folks they don't like what the legislature's doing. They could go, try to get the governor to do something about it. We have the court system where essentially, somebody can go, if they don't like a law that we pass, somebody can sue in court and let them try to bring remedy or relief to something they may feel like is unfounded or unwarranted. So, this balance is put in place so that we can have these kind of conversations publicly.
With regard to, just to go back to the question though, are you comfortable leaving it at 60%, or do you believe that it should be raised, the standard for approval for constitutional amendment, to 2/3, to 66%?
I would, look, I'm pretty comfortable at 60%. So I'd want to listen to the argument of what why go to 66, and again, something more than just political philosophy, right? We're talking about a serious mechanism here to amend the Constitution.
When we come back, we continue the conversation as we turn to the issue of abortion. Stay with us. Welcome back. We now continue our conversation with the incoming Senate President, Republican Ben Albritton, and the next minority leader of the state Senate, Democrat Jason Pizzo. I did want to just circle back to, as Senator Pizzo said earlier, we have not seen a lot of culture war issues this time around in terms of, the Confederate Monument Bill, the outright abortion ban. Those all seem to just sort of fade away. But I am curious, Senator Albritton, as you look ahead towards your time as Senate President, how do you view those types of issues that tend to often get tied up in the courts for years, but create a lot of rancor within the chamber? And I guess, where do you come down on, and I realize it's a gloated phrase to even refer to it as culture wars. They're real issues for a number of people, but where do you view that in terms of how productive the Senate needs to be and where their time and energy should be focused?
Jim, I know that culture wars are going to be part of what happens in the legislature forever. And the truth is the issues will change, but the battle over culture has been going on in the legislature since the very beginning, since statehood began for us, and they began to have meetings up here in Tallahassee. So I expect that. But what I do know is that food matters and water matters, and having a fresh new approach to government efficiency matters. So I expect we're going to have a lot of conversation about those three things. At a minimum, there'll be other stuff I know that'll be out there. We have a long list of initiatives that I'd like to work with our minority leader on and get his input on, so we can come up with a really good product. But food matters, water matters, and government efficiency, getting it right and how government works, transparency, accountability, those things matter.
And I appreciate that. I do want to put you essentially on the record, because I do think that this year is going to be a year that is going to be dominated by the issue of abortion. I think we're waiting on the Supreme Court decision on the 15-week abortion ban. It's widely expected to go through, which will then 30 days later trigger the 6-week abortion ban in Florida. At the same time, we're waiting on the state Supreme Court to decide whether or not the ballot initiative should be on the November ballot to enshrine the right of an abortion into the state's constitution. Can you just, in general terms, talk to me about your views as it comes to abortion? And would you favor an outright abortion ban in the state of Florida?
Well, I would suggest, yes, to be on the record, I would suggest if we end up with a 6-week ban, that's largely what that is. That we do have, now also, you've got the caveat of rape, incest, human trafficking, and so you have the exceptions that also are important for creating balance on an issue like this. So, look, I'm going to vote for pro-life issues. I'm a pro-life guy. It's the way I was raised. My faith leads me in that direction. So I'm going to be supportive of anything we can do to lower the number of abortions that happen in the state.
Do you also, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at, and I'm giving you an easy way out if you haven't, but the Alabama Supreme Court ruling that embryos are people, and the impact and the ripple effect that may now have on IVF, in vitro fertilization, and other issues in the state of Alabama. Do you believe that embryos are people?
I haven't seen that. Quite honestly, I haven't put thought into that issue. So no, I'm not prepared to comment about that.
All right. Last thing I want to bring up just for both of you is the issue of mental health. This is one of those issues that I think the legislature has this year started to tackle. I know that there is a measure moving in the House and the Senate to reform or renew or update the Baker and Marchman Acts, which are important. I think that there's some movement there. I think that there are also a couple of bills that are still pending. Not sure whether they're going to go to improve mental health services in prisons and in the criminal justice system. Is this, I realize that where your focus is, Senator Albritton, but on the issue of mental health, have you given it much thought, and where do you see that as an issue whether it relates to within the prison system or within the criminal justice system or just in the community at large?
Jim, at the end of the day, I'll leave you with this blanket statement. We can get into separate categories or silos of where it may be worse or not be as bad. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's anybody in the Florida legislature that could answer that question any other way than we understand that there are some crises going on in society today and in nearly every segment. You can talk about schools, you can talk about prisons, you can talk about families, you can talk about a lot of things. But the mental health challenges going on today are real. So I am absolutely open to learn about it, to understand what treatment opportunities are out there. I have not seen the documentary we were talking about earlier, but look forward to watching that and reading that and meeting with those folks. Can always learn something with open-minded discussion. So it's real. The challenge is real, and we look forward to tackling it here in Tallahassee. I'd say that's fair.
Senator Pizzo, where do you think things stand right now in terms of some of the reforms you and I have discussed over this session? As we sort of come to an end at this session, some things seem to be happening, but not nearly enough is being done. That's the way I sort of categorize it. How would you put it at this point?
It's about educating our colleagues. We all come here with a different skill set, but I've seen three big seismic shifts, and we're shifting and pivoting now towards a lot of issues, much to my delight, even though I think they've taken a while. I'll give you an example. During the Rick Scott administration, they weren't allowed to utter the words climate change. Senator Albritton was the chair of the newly formed Resiliency Committee last year, and they made me the vice chair to talk about infrastructure and water quality and those things. We weren't allowed to talk about opioids. You had 3 16-year-old teenagers on your show, Jim, who proposed to me, if you remember, to put Narcan in high schools. And it was no for the first 2 years. And then everyone got wise and got educated on opioids. Now everyone's celebrating the idea of putting Narcan in high schools, colleges. And now we have a Narcan Awareness Day. On mental health, we've come a long way that it's no longer really associates with a stigma as much, that we realize it's mental wellness as much as anything. I have warned Senator Albritton as he comes in as president that we're getting the data of a lot of deferred maintenance. We have years of deferred maintenance on people and on infrastructure. And what I mean by that is we have 67 dilapidated prisons that KPMG just issued a report on that need to be addressed. It's going to be expensive. On mental health crises, on education inside of prisons, on a number of things. But I'm delighted to be coming in at this time when, yes, it takes 1, 2, 3 years. Senator Bradley, Jim has a bill that she filed on condos, which is principally what I filed 5 years ago. So yeah, it's a slower moving ship. It's a more deliberate body. The upper chamber is the third largest state in the country. But I am I'm optimistic. I am plainly optimistic about the next 24 months where I will serve as minority leader and Senator Albritton will serve as president to actually get stuff done that's less clickbaity and a lot more productive, not just for today, but Senator Albritton understands a future generation kind of idea and leaving a legacy. So that's what we hope to do together.
I agree with everything you just said.
We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. If you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. I do enjoy hearing from you. Well, that's all the time we have. We'll be back again next week. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.